Greetings to all the learners. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is Globalization and Development Dilemmas, case study of gender. In this lecture, we shall analyze and look at important features concerning globalization and international relations and its link with reference to development, looking at specific case study of gender. This lecture shall explain the importance of globalization in international relations. It shall elaborate on how globalization has an important role with reference to development dynamics. It shall discuss how gender is an important perspective that must be understood in analysis of globalization and development. This lecture shall be of interest to scholars, learners, students of development studies across social sciences from the fields of economics, political science, sociology, gender studies, amongst others. Now, when we think about cross-border trade in goods and services, its increasing reach, when we look at technology, how it is impacting every aspect of our lives and livelihoods, flow of investment, people and information. When we look around and hear about rising economic partnership between and amongst nation states, with the proliferation of ties in world economies, cultures and population, all of it is dubbed under and understood under the bigger phenomena of globalization. Globalization signifies the spread of products, technology, information and jobs across national borders and cultures. Globalization implies interdependence of nations around the globe through free trade. Globalization is the process by which ideas, knowledge, information, goods and services, they spread around the world. Now, when we talk about globalization, a very important topic, that term that arises is that of global village. We get this term from the very important work by Marshall McLuhan. That is, name of the work was Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man. The work was published in 1964. Now, this work coins this very significant concept of global village. Now, this global village has all the more special significance when we try to understand globalization in the contemporary scenario. For example, as we just discussed, that when we hear about that how today there has been increase in cross-border trade in goods and services, when we hear about increasing proliferation and reach of technology, how economic partnerships have been fostered between and amongst nations in flow of investment, people and information, all of it points towards the process and dynamics involved in globalization. And this presents to us the bigger picture of interdependence of nations around the globe through free trade. Now, as we are discussing the concept of globalization, let us have a look towards some of the academic definitions and theorizations presented by scholars from the realm of international relations theory. John Arts called in two very important works that we must take reference for the purpose of not only the lecture but also for enhancing the quality of our answers and presenting better research inputs in our term papers. John Arts calls very important work Beyond the Buzzword Towards a Critical Theory of Globalization. This work comes up in an edited book in 1996. Another very important work, that is Globalization, a Critical Introduction. Now, John Arndt theorizes that global events can, via telecommunication, digital computers, audiovisual media, rocketry and the like, occur almost simultaneously anywhere and everywhere in the world. Now, what is essential that how the idea of global village that was pointed by Marshall McLuhan, how Jean-Art Colt also in this definition points out that how because of this increasing reach of technology, growing impact of technology, today somewhere we are in a domain where time and space do not matter. We are living at times where events, as the definition goes, occur simultaneously anywhere and everywhere in the world. Further, as we are discussing globalization, another important reference from Jean-Art Colt's work, that is Globalization, a critical introduction, and we take reference from this work to understand and quote the definition that globalization refers to the spread of new forms of non-territorial social activity. Dear learners, as we are taking this lecture forward, we now refer to this very important work by David Held, Anthony McGrew, David Goldbald and Jonathan Perrotin, that is Global Transformation, Politics, Economics and Culture. Now, in this work, there is this reference that is globalization is understood as, and we quote, processes of change which underpin a transformation in the organization of human affairs by linking together and expanding human activity across regions and continents. Now, as we delve deeper into this theorization, we get the sense that the process of change that globalization presents, it is witnessed in the sense that how human activity across regions and continents is under a domain of linkages and interrelationship. Another important perspective that we get from Anthony Giddens' work, that is the consequences of modernity. The work is from Stanford University Press, 1990. Now, Anthony Giddens points out that globalization is a constitutive feature of the modern world. Further, he also points out that the work also points out that modern history includes many examples of globalization. Anthony Giddens, the British social theorist, in his other works also points out that future is not fixed. So, and also we must understand that globalization enhances both our opportunities as well as responsibilities. Now, we all know that globalization always existed. That is, when we look at the Great Silk Route, it is a very prime and important example of how trade and ties between people, goods proceeded. But the contemporary globalization, especially driven by neoliberal perspective, gained popularity after the Cold War in early 1990s. In the contemporary times, it indeed has wide-ranging effects. When we are trying to chart out and understand that what are these wide-ranging effects with reference to causing or not causing development, we shall use the lens of gender to elaborate further. Now, we all know that globalization is an important topic in the study of international relations. Further, it is equally important while understanding the dynamics of development in the contemporary times. Now, why do we study international relations with reference to globalization? Because when we talk about interdependence, integration, they are important facts of global world now. Further, we must also factor in that there is a change of relationship between individual states. And what is this change of relations? Earlier, the realist perspective gave primacy to the state. The state was the primary rational actor. Other non-state actors like international organizations, multinational firms were not important. But in the present times, dear learners, we must factor in that states today exist in the context which is interdependent as well as interconnected. This brings us to the other focus, that why study development then? As we all know that today there has been a change in the dynamics of international system. States, we all know, are dependent on each other than ever before. Further, in this dependent aspect, states are also working together through various cooperative mechanisms to work on absolute gains. In this scenario, non-state actors from multinational corporations to development issues are becoming significant. So, from non-state actors' presence increase to increase in agenda that drives international relations, there has been a definite change. Seen in this perspective, the literature on globalization, the literature on development also has evolved over time. Now, we have to look at both this perspective using that how beneficial or not, whether advantageous or not. This has been for the purpose of gender issues. We take reference to a very important report that is from the World Bank. This work is by Ian Golden and Kenneth Reinhardt, 2007. It was there, Globalization for Development, Trade, Finance, Aid, Migration and Policy. As we look into this work points out, as we all know, that globalization has been there. It has existed in human civilization. Further, as we go through this work, we get the sense of how time has ensured that models of economic activity, mechanisms to drive interaction evolve over time. For example, sailboats, caravans, to steamboats, cargo planes, or when we look at the contemporary scenario where we witness global production and distribution networks, increase in international flows of services, capital and information. Seen in this scenario, we have the book makes some important aspects to highlight. That is, set of pro-poor and pro-market policies that allow for more equal market competition among and within countries, and that as policy take account of externalities as much as possible. The book presents some interesting insights, that is, size of today's global economy is indeed a testament to the speed of change. For example, in 2005, the world economic output total was US $35 trillion. And if we go by reports, that it is an amount likely to double that is by 2030, assuming that the modest growth continues. Now, important argument that this book points out, which is very essential, both with reference to globalization and development, that there is a false dichotomy that holds that policies that favor the poor cannot be pro-market. Related to it, that there is an enormous set of pro-poor and pro-market policies that allow for more equal market competition among and within countries, and that ask that policy take into account externalities as much as possible. Now, development, we all know that it became popular in the field of international relations in 1950s. During the Cold War, when the world was divided into two different camps driven by different ideologies of capitalism versus communism, herein the concept of third world, terms like progress, modernization, development were very popular, and often used interchangeably. The argument here, what we must underline here, is that in the development dynamics, the earlier scholarship was, when we look at in the post Second World War time, it was dominated by Western state scholar, and later when we see that how the dependency theory tried to put forward the perspectives of Karl Marx, Lenin, critical theories of development emerged via the dependency theory perspective. Today, there are new dynamics of development. For example, we don't just look at development from the point of view of rich versus poor, or from the point of view of addition of jobs. Now, new dynamics of development imply sustainable development, human development, grassroots development, green development, etc. Further, today development has an important bearing with reference to issues concerning security also. An example here, that how the concept of human security takes into account economic security as its important component. Now, globalization, as we just seen in the debate, that with the process of integration, it indeed led to better things. One of the causes of globalization was expansion of transnational economic production, migration, communications and technology. What was the consequence of all of it? Jobs, welfare, development. Herein there is a concern that is of gender injustice, and we must understand that there are many diverse ideas and approaches in this aspect also. Now, when we talk about feminist approaches with reference to globalization, we must understand that feminism tries to debate that how gender as a social construct works in a manner which leads to subordination and marginalization of women. So, the key idea while we are approaching development and globalization dynamics, the feminist approaches, they put forward the idea of subordination of women, both with reference to theoretical anchors and policy issues and working implementation thereof. The key idea is subordination of women. For example, when we take reference to Alison Jagger's work, we look at the framework of global justice, that how there is systematic structural injustice on a global scale. The traditional understanding of international relations concept, when we go by the reflections presented by feminist scholarships in international relations, it points out that how concepts like state, power, national interest, they have an implicit male bias. J. Ann Tickner's deconstruction of 6 principles of political realism of Hans Morgenthau is based on this premise, that how the understanding of key concepts of international relations works in a manner that leads to marginalization of women. Another important perspective that we get with reference to globalization and dynamics that are involved in development, growth and welfare is from the work of Iris Marion Young, wherein there is a call for new relational model of responsibility. There is this discussion on social connection model, that is how individuals bear responsibility for structural injustices and how this must be factored in while analyzing dynamics of development or looking at the issues of globalization. When we look at economic realms, trade liberalization, neoliberalism, which are indeed important aspects of both globalization as well as development, indeed they generated opportunities, but one cannot ignore the challenges. There are many cases which have been pointed out in several news and in policy debates also, that is how working conditions are not adequate, working hours are too long, wages are low, especially for women. This becomes all the more problematic. For example, when we look at trade liberalization, it is not only about rich versus poor nations. There are academic studies that how women have been impacted because of this gendered effects of structural adjustment policies, how there are additional burden on women both within the household as well as the public sphere. We must refer to this work, Alison Jagger's work, that is globalization good for women? And another important work by I.M. Young, that is Responsibility for Justice. All of it points towards certain important dynamics that are involved, both with reference to issues that concern globalization as well as how, when we look at the bigger picture of development, one has to factor in that whether this bigger scenario of development, did it cater well to issues of women? When we look at globalization, did the apparatus of globalization bypass the concerns for women? For example, neoliberalism, trade liberalization, capitalism, which are important facets of process and dynamics of globalization and development in the present time. But does this work in a manner that lead to more disadvantages for women? The bigger question that has been pointed out, both with academic debates as well as with reference to policy analysis, that we must look at the gendered impact of various issues that are involved with reference to globalization and development. We must understand that while we are analyzing globalization and development, we must look at the bigger picture of how the subordination of women works both at workplace to bigger focus towards policy analysis. Gender today is having an important bearing with reference to policy analysis. A lot of nations, a lot of deliberations are taking place at several national and international realms in order to have a holistic approach towards policy, wherein concerns of women are seen in the right light with reference to the bigger picture of national interests. Dear learners, we hope the lecture Globalization and Development Dilemmas, looking at gender as an important variable of analysis, presented to you significant inputs and insights. We look forward to positive feedback from you all. Thank you very much.